The history of Rome doesn't start with facts. It starts with stories and myths that are based on real things that happened. According to Roman mythology, the god Mars and a virgin named Rhea Silvia had twin boys named Romulus and Remus. A jealous king told the Tiber to drown these godly kids because he was scared of them. The river, which may have known what would happen to them, gently carried them downstream to the future site of Rome, where they washed up on the shore. A she-wolf found the babies and fed them her milk until a shepherd named Faustulus found them and treated them like they were his own. They learned about their royal ancestry as they grew into strong young men. They then decided to build a new settlement on the banks where they had been saved. But the brothers did fight. Romulus killed Remus in a way that would be remembered in Roman history for a long time. He was the only person who built the new city. In 753 BCE, which Romans would later use as the start of their history, Romulus stood on what would later be called the Palatine Hill and used a plow to mark the borders of Rome. There were only a few huts with thatched roofs on a hill that looked down on the Tiber River when the first people came to live there. To the south were Greek colonies, and to the north were stronger Etruscan cities. Romulus made his community stronger by taking in criminals, exiles, and refugees from other places. Romulus made up the well-known story about the rape of the Sabine women because there weren't enough women. He asked the Sabines from the town next door to a festival, and then he married their daughters to Roman men. After Romulus, kings ruled Rome for almost 250 years. The city grew from a small village to a major regional power with the help of 7 kings. After Romulus, Numa Pompilius came. People remember him as a wise and religious leader who started many of Rome's religious traditions and institutions. He made Pontifex Maximus the head of the Temple of Janus, which only closed when there was peace, which was very rare in Roman history. Tullus Hostilio, the 3rd king, fought Alba Longa and won more land for Rome. When they lost, Rome took in the Alban people. This started a pattern of assimilation that would help Rome for a long time. The famous fight between the Hachi and Curiati triplets from Rome and Alba Longa happened at this time. There was a fight that didn't happen, but it changed the future of both cities. Ancus Marcius, the 4th king, built the first bridge over the Tiber and started the port city of Ostia at the river's mouth. This opened up trade between Rome and the Mediterranean world. He also added Ganiculum Hill to the city, which made the settlement safer as it grew. The 5th king was Tarquinius Priscus. When he was king, the Etruscans had a big impact on Roman culture. He started building the Circus Maximus, where chariot races would happen, and the big temple of Jupiter on Capitol Hill. He was in charge of the big Cloaca Maxima drainage project when it first started. It turned the swampy valley between the hills into what would later become the Roman Forum. Servius Tullus, Rome's 6th king, wrote the first constitution. It put people into groups based on how much money they had and how well they could fight. For hundreds of years, the Centurate Assembly was a big part of Roman politics and the military. Servius also built the first wall around the whole city to protect it. It had the 7 famous hills of Rome. There are 7 hills: Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Vimeole, Escalane, and Calon. The last king was Tarquin the Proud, or Tarquinius Superbus. He wasn't a good boss. The Temple of Jupiter and other great buildings were built while he was king. But the Roman nobles turned against him because he was cruel and proud. His son, Sextus Tarquinius, raped Lucretia, a good Roman noblewoman. This was the last straw. Lucius Junius Brutus and Collatinus, Lucretia's husband, led a revolt against this horrible act. The monarchy ended in 509. Tarquin and his family had to leave Rome, which was the start of the Roman Republic. This new way of running the government, which was meant to stop one person from having too much power, would change Rome's future and how people thought about politics for thousands of years. This important time in Rome's history helps us understand how it became what it is today. Rome has always been able to change. It took ideas from both the Greeks and the Etruscans and made them its own. The Romans who lived in the early days made rules for the law, the military, and practical engineering that would help them build their empire. The city only had a few small villages at first. Over time, it grew to include many settlements on the 7 hills. These settlements were linked by paths that would later become the famous streets of Rome. The city had grown to about 35,000 people by the end of the monarchy. Because of this, it was one of the biggest cities in central Italy, but it was still small compared to how big it would get. Families were the most important part of society at the start of Rome. The head of the family had almost complete control over the people who lived with him. The Romans were very careful about how they practiced their religion because they believed that doing the right things would keep the Pax Deorum, or peace with the gods. This was important for the city to do well. Think about these early Romans, farmers, warriors, priests, and craftsmen, building the city that will last forever as you fall asleep. Rome started out as a tiny village on the banks of the Tiber River. It became an empire that spanned 3 continents and was unlike any other in history. But that growth was still to come. Rome was about to enter its Republican period when the kings left. It was ready to start on the path to greatness that would make its name last forever. The people were in a new time after the last king of Rome ran away. The monarchy that had helped the city grow was no longer there. There was a brave new way to run the city that would shape Rome's future for the next 500 years. The new republic was supposed to stop the concentration of power that had led to tyranny when Tarquinius Superbus was in charge. 2 consuls, or judges, were chosen every year to run the country instead of the king. They both had the right to say no to what the other person wanted. This system made it impossible for one person to run Roman politics. The Senate was made up of smart men from noble families who gave very important advice. They couldn't make laws, though. The early republic was about to go out of business right away. The exiled king looked for friends in nearby cities, while the powerful Etruscan lord, Lars Porsena, besieged Rome. According to legend, Horatius Cocles, a Roman hero, fought off the Etruscan army on a bridge all by himself while his friends destroyed it behind him. This kept the city from being taken. Politics in Rome were just as hard as politics in other places. At first, patricians, who were hereditary nobles, who ran both political and religious institutions, ran the republic. The plebeians, who were the majority of people, weren't in charge, and usually owed money to patrician landowners. This fight between the orders would change Roman politics for hundreds of years. When the plebeian soldiers, who made up most of Rome's military strength, left the city to go to the Holy Mount, it was the first big social crisis. This was the first time that a general strike was recorded in writing. This extreme step forced patricians to create the office of tribune of the plebs, which gave magistrates the power to stop laws that hurt the common people. People called tribunes sacrian. Their faith said that anyone who hurt them would die. Making the 12 tables was the next very important thing. The forum was where everyone could see Rome's first written law code. These laws made it clear what the patricians had done that was against the law. The 12 tables were a big step toward making the law more fair, even though they still favored the rich in many ways. They also thought that everyone should know the rules. Rome was having these problems at home, but it was also slowly taking control of central Italy. The city fought a lot of wars with nearby groups, such as the Vulli, Aqui, Sabines, and most importantly, the Etruscans. The Romans took over Veii, a wealthy city of the Etruscans that was only 12 miles north of Rome. This made their land twice as big. The Celtic Gauls beat the Roman army at the Allia River and then took over Rome, which stopped this expansion in its tracks. Even though most of the city was destroyed, the defenders stayed strong on the Capitoline Hill. People say that holy geese in the Temple of Juno warned the Romans about a night attack, which saved the citadel. The Romans would remember this disaster for hundreds of years, but the Gauls finally left after getting a lot of gold as a ransom. It was amazing how quickly Rome got back on its feet after this. They made the walls stronger and rebuilt the city. Rome beat the Latin League in a few decades and brought these groups into its growing empire. Some Latin communities became full Roman citizens, but others only got some rights. This created a system of graduated citizenship that would be very important to how the Romans ran their government. In the middle years of the Republic, politics changed a lot. The Licinian Sexian laws said that one consul had to be a plebeian. This meant that the highest official could be someone who wasn't a patrician. For the next few decades, plebeians were in charge of all the most important religious and magistrate jobs. Even though politics was becoming more about money than birth, this process of social integration kept Rome from having the class wars that hurt many Greek city-states. Rome had to fight with other strong countries in the area as it got stronger. The Samnites were people who lived in the mountains in the middle of Italy. Rome fought 3 long wars with them. Rome was able to take over the whole Italian peninsula, from coast to coast, thanks to these wars. As Rome took over more of central and southern Italy, it came across the advanced Greek cities of Magna Graecia. Tarentum, the strongest of these, was afraid the Romans would get stronger, so it asked Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus in Greece, for help. Pius brought a huge army to Italy, and it had war elephants that the Romans had never seen before. Pius won a lot of battles against Roman armies, but he lost so many men that his army got weaker with each small victory. After a failed campaign in Sicily, Pius went back to Greece, leaving the Greek cities to deal with Rome on their own. Not long after that, Tarentum fell, and Rome took control of all of Italy south of the Po River. It was a smart move for Rome to rule over this new Italian confederacy. Rome was in charge of foreign and military matters, but it let its allies run their own governments in their own areas. People were more loyal because there were more levels of citizenship and rights under the law. Roman colonies on the peninsula served 2 purposes. They gave veterans land and built important military bases. Rome would have more soldiers than any other Mediterranean country because of this Italian alliance system. This would be very helpful in the wars that are about to happen. In the past, countries worked together in a very different way than they do now that Italy is united. It was a big country with a central government, but it also let different parts of the country be different. Rome quickly changed its mind about Italy and turned its attention to Sicily, where the western part of the island was ruled by Carthage, a powerful maritime empire based in North Africa. Rome had to make a big choice when a group of Italian mercenaries called the Mamertines asked the city to keep them safe from the Syracusans and Carthaginians in Sicily. Rome would have to fight Carthage, which had been a naval power for hundreds of years and knew a lot more about the sea than Rome did. The First Punic War started when the Senate agreed to the Mamertines' request. Rome had to start over and build its navy from scratch because of this war. The Romans lost some battles at first, but they took a ship from Carthage and used it as a model to build their own fleet. They put a corvus on these boats. A corvus is a bridge that lets Roman soldiers get on a ship and fight with their better infantry skills. The Romans kept going, even though storms and battles caused a lot of damage. They won in the end. As a settlement, Carthage gave Rome a lot of money and Sicily. The Second Punic War was the closest Rome came to being wiped out since the GIC sack. Hannibal Barca, a brilliant general from Carthage, led an army of war elephants from Spain over the Alps and into Italy. He beat Roman armies 3 times in terrible ways, at the Trebia River, Lake Trasim, and most importantly at Cana, where 50,000 Romans died in one day. Even though these things happened, Rome didn't give up. While Rome raised new armies, Hannibal marched through Italy, winning over unhappy Roman subjects. General Quintus Fabius Maximus used tricks to avoid fighting directly, but a young commander named Scipio took the war to Spain and then to Africa. When Carthage was in danger, they called Hannibal back from Italy. The Battle of Zama was won by Scipio, who is now known as Africanus. This ended the war. Carthage lost its navy, its overseas territories, and its political freedom, which made it a Roman tributary state. After defeating Carthage, Rome became the most powerful country in the Western Mediterranean. The Romans were more interested in the Hellenistic kingdoms that grew up in the east after Alexander the Great's empire fell. The Roman legions beat King Philip V of Macedonia at Thermopylae and Magnesia, and then they beat King Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. The Romans broke up the old kingdom of Macedonia into 4 republics. Right away, the Romans took over Greece. The Third Punic War ended that same year with the complete destruction of Carthage. These victories had a big impact on Roman society. Italy got a lot of money from the new provinces, which made both the state treasury and private people richer. A lot of slaves were taken during wars, which changed how farming worked in Italy. A lot of people from the country who lost their homes moved to Rome, which made the busy city even worse. This happened because small farms were turned into big estates where slaves worked. The republican political system that worked well in a small city-state didn't work well for running a big empire in the Mediterranean. Governors who were sent to run provinces often abused their power for their own gain. Generals who were successful had soldiers who were loyal to them, which could have been a threat to the power of civilians. As ambition and luxury grew, the old Roman values of duty, simplicity, and self-sacrifice, which they called mos maiorum, the way of the elders, seemed to fade. The last 100 years of the Republic were very chaotic because of these changes. Tiberius Gracchus was chosen as tribune and said that giving away public land would help the poor in the country. Rich senators were very angry with his laws, and in the end, they killed him. The first political murder in Rome in a long time. 10 years later, his brother Gaius Gracchus died in the same way after proposing even more extreme changes, like giving city dwellers money to buy grain. These events broke the long-standing agreement between the ruling elite and made violence a part of Roman politics. After that, generals like Marius and Sulla, who wanted to be powerful, used their armies to get involved in politics. Roman generals had never sent their troops to fight in the city before. Sulla called himself a dictator after he won a bloody civil war against his enemies. Then, he used lists of prescriptions and public posts to kill his enemies and steal their things. Sulla did something very risky, even though he later quit. Pompey, Cassius, and Julius Caesar were 3 strong men who worked together to run Roman politics. The first 3 guys called themselves that. Caesar took over Gaul and did brilliant campaigns, conquered what is now France, and briefly invaded Britain. He made a lot of money, learned how to fight, and became very popular. When the alliance fell apart, the Senate chose Pompey over Caesar. People told Caesar to give up his command, but instead he crossed the Rubicon River with his army and said, "The die is cast." This started a civil war. After beating Pompey's troops, Caesar became the dictator of Rome and made a lot of changes, like a new calendar. Republicans were worried about his growing power and the fact that he wanted to be a king because he had been a dictator for life. Brutus and Cassius led a group of people who killed Caesar in the Senate House on the Ides of March. The Republic didn't come back after Caesar died. A new civil war broke out instead. Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son, worked with Mark Antony and Lepidus in the Second Triumvirate to find the people who killed him. After beating Brutus and Cassius at Philippi, the 3 men in charge of Rome divided it up among themselves. There were always going to be problems, especially between Octavian in the west and Antony in the east, where he worked with Cleopatra II, the Queen of Egypt. Octavian's troops, led by Agrippa, won the last battle at Actium against Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. The lovers fled to Egypt, where they eventually killed themselves. Octavian was now the only ruler of all of Rome's lands. He made sure not to make the same mistakes that Caesar did. He called himself Prince, the first citizen, instead of king or dictator, even though he had more power than anyone else. The Senate gave him the name Augustus, which marked the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. The Republic's legacy was not straightforward. In the end, its balance of power in the Constitution didn't stop civil war and dictatorship. In 500 years, Rome went from being a small Italian city-state to ruling the whole Mediterranean world. The emperors kept the names of the institutions that were part of the Republic. For thousands of years, Western political thought still valued the ideas of freedom, civic duty, and constitutional government. The Senate met in January of 27 BCE, and Octavian was there. Rome was at a turning point. The Republic that had ruled for 500 years was in ruins after decades of civil war. Octavian didn't just say he was king. He played the political game very well. He said that the Senate and the people of Rome would get their power back, which made it sound like he was giving up the huge power he had gained. The Senate, which was full of people who liked him, gave him the name Augustus, a religious name that means a person who is holy or well known. They also gave him a lot of control. He had the power to veto, the right to go to court, and many other rights. He also controlled important provinces where legions were stationed. Historians say that this was the start of the Principate. Not the king, but the first citizen was Augustus. It looked like a republic, but he was in charge of everything. For 41 years, Augustus would be in charge. For hundreds of years, he would make rules that would change how the Roman Empire ran. He reduced the number of legions in the army from 60 to 28, and sent older soldiers to live in colonies in Italy and the provinces. He changed how taxes were collected, started a postal service, made groups of firefighters, and set up a police force that would stay in Rome. The buildings he worked on changed the capital. He was so proud of how he turned Rome from a city of bricks into one of marble that he talked about it. Augustus kept Rome's borders safe and made them bigger in foreign affairs. The Germanic tribes were pushed back past the Rhine, and diplomacy with the Parthian Empire helped keep the eastern border of the empire safe. Spain finally fell after hundreds of years of fighting back. The Danube River was Rome's northern border in Europe. Augustus was able to do this, but the Republic hadn't been able to do it in the last few decades. This might have been the most important thing he did. He didn't have a son, so he slowly made Tiberius, his stepson, more important. He wanted to make sure that Tiberius would get the power without any trouble when he died. Tiberius was a good general, but he didn't want to be the emperor. He started the Julio-Claudians dynasty, which was in charge of Rome for more than 50 years. Things were going well at first, but they got worse when he went to the island of Capri and left the ambitious Taurian prefect Sejanus in charge of the state. When Tiberius learned of Sejanus's plan to take over, he began a series of treason trials that terrified the Roman upper class. Caligula, Tiberius's grandnephew, was the next ruler. He seemed to be doing well at first, but then he lost it. People may have lied about him being too mean, crazy, and strange, like when he wanted to turn his horse into a video game console. The fact that he was killed after only 4 years in power shows that the Roman elite didn't like him very much. The emperor's personal soldiers, the Praetorian Guard, then put Claudius on the throne. Even though his family had put him on the sidelines because of his health problems, Claudius was a good manager. He ruled for 13 years, during which time he took over Britain and added new provinces in the east to the empire. He also made it easier for more people to become citizens and let Gauls join the Senate. He knew that the future of Rome depended on bringing its provinces together instead of taking over Italy. Nero was the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Seneca, a philosopher, and Burrus, the Taurian prefect, helped him become a good king. But as he fought for its freedom, his rule got worse and worse. After the big fire in Rome, he killed his mother Agrena, kicked his pregnant wife to death, and then went after Christians. When Nero's popularity fell, revolts broke out, and he killed himself. He is said to have said, "What an artist dies in me." His death led to the year of 4 emperors, which was a time of chaos. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius All quickly became emperors, but each time they were overthrown by a military coup. Vespasian, who was in charge of the Eastern legions, won in the end and began the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian brought stability back to the empire during his 10 years as emperor. He didn't have much money, but he was good at running the government. After he spent a lot of money, Nero made sure that people were careful with it again. The Colosseum, which was once called the Flavian Amphitheater, is the most important building he built. It was built as a gift for the Romans, where Nero's lavish palace used to be. A few months before Mount Vesuvius erupted and destroyed the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, Titus, his oldest son, became king. People were very sad when Titus died, after only 2 years as emperor. He was so nice when things went wrong, like the fire in Rome. The last Flavian emperor was Domitian. There was a lot of fighting along the Danube border and in Britain while he was king for 15 years. The Senate didn't like him because he was a good leader, but too strict. He died, and that was the end of the Flavian dynasty. The Senate then picked one of its own members, the old man Nerva, to be the emperor. Nerva picked General Trajan to be his successor because he didn't have a son or daughter to take over and didn't have a lot of military support. This started a pattern of adoptive succession that worked well for Rome for almost 100 years. Trajan was the first emperor not born in Italy. He was born in Spain. During his 19 years as emperor, the Roman Empire grew to its largest size. He took over Dia, which is now Romania, and added its gold mines to the empire. His biggest campaign added Armenia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Parthia to the Roman Empire. For a short time, the empire controlled the Persian Gulf. His successor would lose some of these eastern conquests, but they were the biggest gains in Roman land. People liked Trajan not just because he won wars, but also because he was a good leader. He built a lot of things, like a big forum in Rome and other things in the provinces. He started the Aula, which helps kids in Italy who don't have much money. People in Rome who lived after him thought he was the best emperor to compare other emperors to. Some people thought that Trajan's fans made up the story that he took Hadrian in when he was dying. When Hadrian became emperor, he changed the way the empire worked right away. He knew the empire was too big, so he stopped Trajan's conquests in the east, and instead worked to make the empire stronger instead of bigger. Hadrian traveled to different provinces for more than half of the 21 years he was emperor. He would often walk with his soldiers to check on the safety of the borders. He told them to build a big wall across the island's narrow northern waist in Britain. This wall, which is still partly up today, stopped tribes from coming into the area. In the empire, similar works on the frontier got stronger, which made the borders clearer instead of letting more growth happen. Hadrian liked Greek culture and had a beard like theirs. He spent a lot of time building the huge temple to Zeus in Athens. It had been going on for hundreds of years. The Pantheon in Rome is one of his most famous buildings. The revolutionary concrete dome is still standing today, which shows how smart Roman engineers were. Hadrian chose Antonius Pius as his successor, and he ruled for 23 years without any major issues. The empire got bigger while he was in charge, because there weren't any big wars or problems. Antonius followed the custom of adoption and chose Marcus Aurelius as his successor. But he told Marcus that Lucius Verus had to be his co-emperor. Marcus Aurelius was a devoted Stoic philosopher whose works are still widely read today. He was a philosopher, but as king, he mostly had to deal with war. Along the Danube, more and more Germanic tribes began to push against Roman borders. One reason could be that people were moving deeper into Europe and Asia. At first, Marcus and Lucius were in charge together, but when Lucius died, Marcus had to do everything by himself. The Antonine Plague, which might have been smallpox, was also bad for the empire. Soldiers. Fighting in the east brought it back. This disease may have killed 5 million people in Roman lands, which hurt the economy and the army at a very important time. There were problems, but Marcus Aurelius kept the borders safe, and even planned to add new provinces beyond the Danube before he died. Marcus didn't pick the best person to be his successor by adopting them, just like the people who came before him. Instead, he gave the job to his biological son, Commodus, a choice that would be very bad for Rome. The Roman Empire was at its best from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, which was 200 years ago. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, may have made it safer for 70 million people to live. More than 250,000 kilometers of roads made it easier for people to talk to each other, trade, and move troops across the Mediterranean and beyond. New public services helped cities grow and do well. There are aqueducts that bring in clean water, as well as public baths, theaters, and places to meet. Roman law was getting better and more fair, and it was used on 3 continents. During this time, art and literature also did well. During this time, Virgil wrote the Aeneid, Ovid wrote the Metamorphoses, Tacitus wrote histories, Suetonius wrote biographies, and Pliny the Younger wrote letters. The Romans were the first large group of people to know a lot about useful things like farming, medicine, architecture, and engineering. They also made progress in science at a slower rate than in literature. This was when Christianity started and grew, which may have been the most important thing that happened. Tiberius was the emperor when Jesus of Nazareth was born and died. The new religion slowly spread through the empire, even though some people were hurt by it. There were already Christian groups in most big cities when Marcus Aurelius came along. Later on, these groups would change the empire a lot. In the early empire, the provinces also became more important. Italy lost its special status when emperors from Spain and other places took over. Ultimately, all individuals residing within the empire and possessing freedom attained citizenship. Trade networks linked places that were far apart, and Roman markets got things from China and India, among other places. A few important things made this time of growth and stability possible. The Augustan settlement found a middle ground between honoring the past and giving the emperor power. The adoption system that made a lot of great leaders. The economy wasn't as good as it is now, but it made enough extra money to keep cities going. There were safe borders that kept big invasions from happening, and a standing army of nearly 400,000 men. No one knew that this golden age was coming to an end when Marcus Aurelius died on the Danubian border. When Commodus became emperor, a chain of events began that would test the imperial system in ways that its creators never thought possible. But the early empire's successes would last for a long time, giving other civilizations a picture of peace, wealth, and good government that would last long after Rome itself had fallen. It was the end of the Roman Empire's golden age, when Commodus became emperor and Marcus Aurelius died. Commodus didn't care much about the problems that come with being in charge of a government. On the other hand, his dad was a philosopher. He was good-looking and in shape, and he liked the gladiatorial arena better than the council chamber. He fought in fake battles a lot, charging the imperial treasury a lot of money to show up and bragging about how many times he beat opponents who were too scared to lose to him. While Commodus lived out his fantasies, calling Rome Colonia Commodana and saying he was the reincarnation of Hercules, experienced leaders kept the empire running smoothly. But people were scared of how he killed senators and other officials for no reason. Narcissus, his wrestling partner, killed him in the bath on the last day of the year. Because they were worried about what would happen to them next, his close friends came up with this plan. The Senate picked General Pertinax to be the new king after Commodus died. He died while trying to get the Taurian Guard to act right again. They killed him after 3 months because he wouldn't give them a special bonus. What happened next was probably the most humiliating thing that has ever happened in Rome. The Taurians really did sell the empire to the person who offered the most money. This dubious honor went to Didius Julianus, a rich senator, but he only ruled for 66 days. The provincial armies were so angry about what was going on in Rome that they chose their own emperors. Septimius Seius, the leader of the Pannonian legions, got out of this mess and marched to Rome. He put an end to the Taurians' embarrassing relationship and started a new family. Severus was a good soldier who kept his job by winning battles and killing his enemies without mercy. He was the first emperor to be born in Leptis Magna, North Africa. When he spoke Latin, he had a strong accent. The Roman government changed a lot while he was in charge. The government, for example, got more military and used horsemen instead of senators for important jobs. Severus was in charge for 18 years and fought wars against the Parthian Empire in the east. He made Mesopotamia a new province, and it has a lot of good land for farming. He also went to Britain to fight the Caledonians in Scotland and make Hadrian's wall stronger. He died in Eboracum, which is now York, a northern outpost. People say he told his sons to look down on everyone else and give the soldiers money. Caracalla and Gator were supposed to work together, but they hated each other so much that they couldn't. Caracalla killed his brother in front of their mother, and then ordered a damnatio memorialiae, which erased Geta from all official records and monuments. All of this happened in less than a year. Caracalla then started a reign of terror against the people who supported his brother. Caracalla was a terrible person, but he also wrote the Constitutio Antoniniana, which is one of the most important laws in Roman history. This law made all free men in the empire into Roman citizens. One reason for this law was to get more money from taxes. Another goal was to make it clear that Rome was no longer a city-state, but a universal empire, where citizenship was based on law rather than race. Caracalla died while he was running for office in the east. While he was going to the bathroom on the side of the road, a soldier stabbed him to death. The harsh dynasty lasted a long time and had many rulers, all of whom were related to the amazing women in the family. Julia Mimser was very important because she helped her grandsons, Elgabalus and Alexander Sais, become strong. Septimius Zeus's sister-in-law was her. People in Rome were shocked by how much Elgabalus loved the Eastern Sun, God, whose name he carried. He wanted this cult to be more important than the religion that most people in Rome followed. People said he married a male charioteer and was effeminate, which made traditional Romans even angrier. 4 years later, the Taurians killed him and threw his body into the Tiber. Alexander Sayce was only 13 when he became king, but his mother, Julia Mamaea, ran the kingdom. He tried to improve things with the Senate and protect traditional values during his 13 years in charge. But the military was getting stronger. The Parthians were replaced by the Sassanids, a new Persian dynasty. They were more dangerous in the east. The Germanic tribes also pushed harder against the lines that separated the Rhine and Danube. Alexander's soldiers turned on him and made Maximus Thrax, a big ex-shepherd from Thrace, emperor when he talked to Germanic tribes instead of fighting them. Maximus was a very different kind of ruler. He was a soldier from a poor family that didn't have much culture or education. He got promoted in the military because he did a good job. He was a good general, but regular people didn't like him because he made them pay a lot of taxes to pay for wars. The Senate backed a rebellion in Africa, led by the old governor Gordian and his son, because they wanted to get their power back. The Senate quickly beat them and made 2 of their own members, Pupienus and Balanus, co-emperors. Maximinus marched into Italy, but his own soldiers killed him while they were attacking Aquileia. The Senate picked people for the Taurian Guard to kill. Then they chose Gordian III, the last emperor's grandson, to be the new emperor. He was only 13. Historians call this time of emperors and usurpers the 3rd century crisis. Over the next few decades, at least 26 men claimed to be emperors. Most of them were in charge for only a few years before they were killed in violent ways. The Roman world seemed to be falling apart as the imperial office became the prize in a never-ending, destructive military lottery. There were threats from outside that made things worse inside. The Goths killed Emperor Dissus and his son in the Battle of Abritus, the first Roman emperor to die in a fight with soldiers from other countries. The Emperor Valerian had an even worse end. The Persian king Shapur II killed him, and is said to have used him as a footstool before killing him and skinning him to use as a trophy. The empire started to fall apart when the central government stopped working. A GIC empire that included Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain broke away in the west with the help of a few local leaders. Queen Zenobia was in charge of the desert trading city of Palmyra in the east and the provinces that stretched from Egypt to Asia Minor. The economy and the government both fell apart because the currency kept losing value to pay for the armies, which made prices go up a lot. It looked like the story of Rome's 1,000 years was coming to an end. But even during this terrible time, skilled people and strong buildings worked together to keep the empire from falling apart. Things changed when Claudius II, Gothicus, became emperor. Roman law changed all the time because lawyers like Ulpian and Pinon worked to make legal ideas better. These ideas would have an effect on many cultures long after Rome fell. Even though the economy was bad, Roman engineering still made great things. From the Aurelian walls to the government buildings in every province. The empire that Diocletian took over was hurt, but not broken, by the end of the 3rd century. The changes that were about to happen would affect every part of how Rome was run. They would make a new imperial system that could deal with the problems of a world that was always changing. The change from Augustus's early empire to the late Roman world was over. A change that took place during a time of trouble and healing. This complicated legacy reminds us that people always have both good and bad traits, and that civilization itself is always both good and bad. As you fall asleep, think about how different the world would be if Rome's power didn't last. If it weren't for the Romans, our languages, laws, buildings, engineering, and even our political and religious groups would all be very different. Rome has changed how we think about ourselves and our society in many ways, from the names of our months to big questions about citizenship and government. The story of Rome, from Romulus to the fall of Constantinople, is a great story of how people have changed, been strong, and done things over the course of more than 2,000 years. The Roman world changed over time, but it never forgot where it came from. The empire was no longer a political entity, but its shadow still had an effect on everything that came after it. This is how people have always lived, so remember that as you fall asleep. The stars that shone on Augustus when he changed Rome from brick to marble are still shining on us today. The Romans wanted safety, wealth, meaning, and beauty for the same reasons we do today. Hopes, fears, and dreams. Rome may be the best thing that came out of Saga snooze because it shows how people can be the same